Hello all. Today we're taking another dive into my collection of historical tube memorabilia, and we're looking at this postcard. This was published on behalf of the Central London Railway and depicts a train described as the latest motor. Let's talk about it. The Central London Railway was the predecessor of the Central Line. As I've said in previous videos, it had two big selling points. One, it was cheap. 2 pennies flat fare no matter who you were or how far you wanted to go. And 2, it was modern. We see both of those selling points here. Firstly, the caption uses the term twopenny tube. Conversely, it doesn't even bother spelling out what CLR stands for. And secondly, well, it's a photo of their brand new train. It might be argued that this is the ancestor of every modern underground train right through to the present day. Or not, I'll let you judge. None of these trains survive intact, although parts of them were used in the construction of this Sleet locomotive in the London Transport Museum collection at Acton Depot. More on that later. The railway opened in 1900, running between Bank and Shepherd's Bush. It wasn't the first tube line, it wasn't even the first deep-level tube line. But it was definitely in on the ground floor. As with any early technology, there were some kinks that needed to be ironed out, and one of them was, what should a tube train be? The very first underground trains on the Metropolitan Railway had consisted of a steam locomotive hauling a set of coaches. Hardly any different from any other train, really. The first deep-level tube line was the City and South London Railway, and the trains on that followed a similar template. The main differences were that the coaches didn't have windows, and the locomotive was electric. The Central London Railway did much the same. They operated using locomotives nicknamed camelbacks. These had a sort of hump in the middle that housed the driver's cab. It meant that they could be driven in either direction safely. They would haul a train of carriages. At the end of the line, the locomotive would uncouple and be replaced by another at the other end. A couple of problems. The first, and most obvious, is that this is a fairly awkward way of operating a high-intensity commuter service. The second was the locomotives themselves. The City and South London Railway's locomotives were small and underpowered. James Henry Greathead, one of the engineers on the Central London Railway in its planning stages, planned to solve both these problems by simply putting a locomotive at both ends. Unfortunately, to get them to operate in tandem, a cable would have to be run the length of the train, and the Board of Trade really did not like that idea. They were very nervous about the concept of fire down there. So instead, the railway ordered engines that were twice as powerful. Except that created new problems. The ungeared, not very sprung engines vibrated. They vibrated a lot. So much so that residents in the buildings above complained. Clearly, this would not do. The inklings of a solution had existed for some years now in Liverpool. The Liverpool Overhead Railway had pioneered the concept of the multiple unit in 1893. Their units had motors built into the coaches and a cab at each end. Both motors could be controlled from either cab. Power was distributed evenly through the train, and there was no need for uncoupling. But the length of trains was limited. As with the plans for the CLR, the coaches needed to be wired together with a high-voltage cable. Frank Sprague, an American engineer, would devise an improved method of multiple unit control in 1897. Sprague, incidentally, would supply the lifts to the Central London Railway. His method meant that each coach would pick up current individually, so there was no need for a high-voltage cable, just a low-voltage current transmitted from the controls. This meant that your multiple unit could be as long as you liked. The first tube line to use multiple units was the Waterloo and City Railway. This was the answer to the CLR's prayers. Well, seemingly. In 1901, the CLR carried out 2 experiments. One to refit 3 locomotives with smaller motors and gearing, the other to motorise 4 coaches. The motor coaches won the day, and so the CLR concluded that that was the way to go. Therefore, a set of brand new motor coaches was ordered, 24 from Brown Marshall and Co., 40 from the Birmingham Railway Carriage and Wagon Company. 6 unmotorised trailer cars were also ordered from the Birmingham Company, and others were converted from old coaches. They entered service in 1903. A typical train was 7 cars long. It's interesting to me that the postcard refers to this train as a motor. I don't think that's a term we'd use now. But I guess it's meant in a literal sense, the coach that supplies motion. On the mainline railways, combined locomotive and coach vehicles called rail motors were quite fashionable, so perhaps it's the same thinking. These trains look rather different from modern ones. The most striking difference is the huge compartment behind the driver's cab housing control equipment. They also didn't have automatic sliding doors. Instead, each train carried 4 gatemen whose job it was to manually open and close the gates at the ends of the carriages. Combined with the fact that there were 2 drivers and 2 guards, these trains were pretty labour-intensive. Still, they worked. All the subsequent tube lines used multiple units. The ones ordered by Underground Electric Railways of London in 1906 bear quite a resemblance to the CLR trains. They kept running as is for more than 20 years. In 1925 they were refurbished with more modern motor equipment, better lighting and ventilation, and finally sliding doors. In this form they kept running into the 1930s. By then they were far from the latest motors. Meanwhile, experiments were underway. London Transport, who had absorbed nearly all the tube lines in 1933, were working on a new kind of train, one that had its control equipment under the floor and therefore had a higher passenger capacity. The experiments were a success, and the result was the 1938 stock. The idea was that the 1938 stock would replace the trains on the Northern Line, which dated from the late 1920s. Those trains would then be cascaded down to the Central Line, where they would replace the 1903 stock. The first transfer was made in 1938, and in 1939 the last 1903 train was taken out of service. An editorial in the Times, which remembered the trains rather fondly, described them as kin to the horse bus and hansom cab. Perhaps a backhanded compliment for a train once lauded as the very latest technology. That wasn't quite the end, though. The withdrawal of the CLR trains coincided with a need for sleet locomotives. These are basically electric locomotives used for removing ice from the conductor rails. Between 1939 and 1940, 18 of these were Frankensteined together at Acton Works, each one from a pair of motor cars joined back-to-back with the passenger section removed. The bogies were fitted with brushes, ice crushers, whatever they are, and nozzles that could spray antifreeze from a pair of 75-gallon tanks mounted in the middle of the locomotive. They were finally withdrawn in the 1980s after de-icing equipment was fitted to passenger trains. So that's an almost 80-year career, from the latest motors to motors operating far later than anyone expected. And people complain about the age of the current Central Line trains. Well, I do hope you enjoyed this frosty tale from the tube. If you did, please do leave a like and consider subscribing for more. I would like, as always, to thank my donors on Ko-fi, on Patreon, and here on YouTube for your generous support. You are the additional pickups to my multiple unit. And I will see you all again very soon. Cheerio.